At one stage it had 800 members. It was the third largest Burns club in existence. And we're still happy to invite everyone to become members for the modest sum of $10 a single, $12 a double, and with that you get newsletters by email, if you have email, from the Robert Burns International Association in Kilmarnock, and also you're invited to take part in the activities of the Robert Burns Association of the Pacific Rim, and they meet each year in either Australia and New Zealand at the moment, but later on Japan and America might also get on board. But this year we're going to be meeting in Dunedin, and that's also part of the membership. So I'll leave some forms here. If anyone would like to join, you're most welcome to join. Thank you.
Now I'd like to ask Majella Cullinane to speak for us. She is the Burns Fellow for 2014.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Thanks to Kay for asking me to come along today, and I look forward to hearing the winning poems a wee bit later. A couple of things. I'm just going to mention a little bit about the background of the Robert Burns Fellowship, and I'm also going to talk a little bit very briefly about what I plan to do this year. The Robert Burns Fellowship is New Zealand's premier literary residency. It was established in 1958 by a group of anonymous Dunedin citizens to commemorate the bicentenary of the birth of Robert Burns, and to perpetuate the community's appreciation of the part played by the related Dunedin family of Dr. Thomas Burns in the early settlement of Otago. The fellowship aims to encourage and promote imaginative New Zealand literature and to associate writers with the university. Among past fellows are many of New Zealand's well-known writers: Hane Tufere, Owen Marshall, Michael King, Fiona Farrell, and a particular favourite of mine, Janet Frame. So I was thrilled and excited to be awarded this rare opportunity: a year to write, an office, and a generous salary. One of the things asked by the selection committee when applying is to submit a book proposal or an idea that you have for the year. I'll discuss mine briefly. In 2011, I received an email from someone who happened to see my name advertised in connection with a course running in Auckland University's continuing education. Hi Majella. My father's grandfather, John Cullinane, was born in Clonakilty, County Cork in 1839 and came to New Zealand in 1862. My brothers have both visited Clonakilty and said it's full of people who look just like us. Potatoes, in other words. Dad, who died aged 81, was the youngest of 11. He grew up around Tangiwai, which is in the central North Island near Mount Ruapehu. His father was a sheep farmer. Dad was a bomber pilot during the war and then flew for the domestic airline NAC until he retired. He married my mother, Cushla Mary Donovan, just after the war. There are two Cullinane families in New Zealand. They are unrelated until one on the other side was made a bishop, Palmerston North, a few years ago, at which point a connection was discovered. Apparently, two brothers came out at the same time and subsequently had a falling out. Knowing my family, that makes perfect sense. When I told my wife I'd emailed you, she said, "Meet the Cuzzies?" She probably moved to the other side of the world to escape the Cuzzies. Kind regards, Jonathan Cullinane. Anyway, the coincidence of this man's ancestor's name, John Cullinane, got me thinking about a family member of my own. My father's uncle, also a John Cullinane, who was born in County Limerick in 1889 and served in the First World War. A little further digging yielded the following information. Private John Cullinane, service number 5589, was listed with C Company, 2nd Battalion Royal Munster Fusiliers in the chaplain's list of the 30th of April 1915. He was subsequently reported wounded in April 1915 at the Battle of Ober Ridge, 9th of May 1915. The next bit of information is that Private John Cullinane of County Limerick was reported wounded with the Royal Fusiliers in October 1918. He also saw service with the Connaught Rangers at some stage. According to my father, John Cullinane returned home shell-shocked, and upon being sent to a convalescence home, subsequently disappeared without a trace, or at least the family never discovered what became of him. So what if this John Cullinane somehow ended up in New Zealand after the First World War? Supposing he'd wanted to escape Europe and the past to start a new life. Of course it's all conjecture. Perhaps further investigation would reveal my family's John had led an altogether different life. But what ifs are a wonderful way of starting a story. The book in its current form begins in Scotland shortly after the end of the war. But just as 1 minute you can be washing dishes in Paikakariki, looking out at the Tasman Sea with a wee toddler yapping in the background, and 5 minutes later discover you've been chosen for the Robert Burns Fellowship, who knows where the book will end up? New Zealand, perhaps. So I'm just going to read a very short extract. Craiglockhart Hospital, Edinburgh, 1918. A man, not yet 27, sits on an armchair overlooking the grounds from a large window. An oak stirs in the distance, its leaves, burgundy and amber, turning crimson now as the light relinquishes to evening. The colour is near blood, an unsettling colour. Autumn, a season which once he would have welcomed, the cold, crisp air, the sense of things shedding and letting themselves go, a readying for rest, is too much to bear. Now, in those colours, he relives for a moment the scattered blood of nameless men, the heaving breaths, trudging through mud, his eyes stinging, searching a landscape where the only signposts are of maimed limbs and dead trees. The sound of guns and smoke from shells, craters and debris everywhere. Even now, over a year on, he's not sure how he's made it back. They say it's a miracle. He's lucky to have survived, to have lost his sight only in one eye, a finger on his right hand, to have a few scars on his neck and back. No one will understand that anxiety, Dr. Burke tells him, the anxiety and guilt of survival. And though we cannot forget the great cost of the war, we must, as others have before us, move forward. Dr. Burke, a gentle, well-respected man who thinks he knows him better than his father ever did, has certainly asked him more questions than he's ever been asked in his life. And not just about his life in the war, but the one before it. Here, for a moment at this window, his peace is invaded by the seasons changing. Even that security, that sense of quiet memory is breached. Strange he should survive. Strange that in order to recover he's told he must remember. Remember when as a young boy he'd leave early in the morning, lucky to have a bit of buttermilk and bread in him before his father and he would set out over the fields to labour at Fran Maloney's. At the end of the day, returning to the small house he shared with 5 siblings and his mother. An order to things, an expectancy, Mass on Sunday and the odd hurling match they'd watch from the side gate, for his father hadn't the halfpenny to go in. He worked hard and slept well, and each day brought a stillness to things he wouldn't have known was contentment. Winter, listening to the humming or whistling of his father, the dance of the robin between bare branches, the grass damp and glistening from frost. A sky silvery blue, the sun that reminded him of the Blessed Sacrament, though he never told anyone. An order here in the hospital too, a strict routine, just as there had been in the army. He pushes the thought aside and looks at the sky again. On first appearance, the view might appear unchanged to those who sit here each day, week after week, month after month. And yet what distinguishes a day can be the smallest of things, a tint of yellow in the clouds rather than red. This evening the sunlight's glow behind the trees, as close to the petal of a daffodil he could find in his mother's garden. A bell in the distance calls him to supper. Echoes from the corridor, the low din of men talking, the scrape of chairs. Through an open window, the call of a bird. Several men on crutches or pushing wheelchairs dressed in pyjamas and dressing gowns, make their way slowly to the dining room. Now I'll hand you over to David. Thank you.
I'll just introduce our judges for this year. We're very fortunate to have been able to secure the services of David Howard once again, who judged the competition last year. David was the fellow for 2013, so he will begin with some memories of his year. And also Paul Veart I'd like to thank too. He's a library member, he's a library servant if you like, he works here, and he's also a local writer, so he was a joint judge with David this year. So I'll hand you over to David first.
Well, listening to Majella, I remember the enthusiasm, the confidence, the positive attitude I had a year ago. That's all evaporated, of course. Leonard Cohen has a wonderful early song, "The Rain Falls Down on Last Year's Man." That's a Jew's harp on the table, that's a crayon in his hand, and all the rain falls down, amen, on the works of last year's man. So I'm about to become a burnt fellow. Of course, what Majella doesn't realise, and this is part of the reason that she's positive, is I'm going to barricade myself in the office on my last day, the last day of January. So when she arrives on February the 3rd, the Monday, she won't be able to get in. She'll be puzzled the key doesn't work, the door doesn't open. I'll be pushing on this side. Eventually she'll go, "Is there anybody there?" "No." I'll say, "David, is that?" "No." I won't budge, of course. I've still got many poems to finish in that office. It's a great office. It's been wonderful to work in, so I'm not surrendering it. Majella will go off, probably having cursed me in Gaelic, and eventually someone from Property Services will arrive with a drill, and they'll drill the lock out. And then I know what's going to happen. It's inevitable. There'll be campus watch. You know, they walk like this. They can't actually walk properly. They're like these blow-up dolls, like this. And they'll look at me and say, "You can't throw me out there. It's the real world. The real world's full of dangerous things. There are Dan Brown novels in the real world. There are sentences like, 'The glass broke glassily.' I can't survive that. I'm not strong enough." They won't listen. I'll just be hurled onto Albany Street. It'll be over. She'll be the goddess. I'll become a garden gnome in some student flat front garden. Ignored. It has been a wonderful year. And it ends as it began, with astonishment. And in my mid-50s, I know, I hide it well. Having never received a residency, I was pretty wide-eyed, as Majella is, when offered the Robert Burns Fellowship. And I've tried over the last year to keep my eyes open. I've tried to present when invitations were offered. I've tried to comment when students asked for comment, and to shut up when they plainly just wanted to share their work without criticism. That's fine. I've appeared in public forums like this, and I've tried to promote curiosity in writing, even if it's not curiosity in my writing, which is the finest kind of curiosity. I'm prepared to settle for someone going to another poet, even a novelist, you know, even that benighted clan, the novelists, are deserving of attention. So if I've been able to do that, I've delivered in some way. When you get a year to write, you think, of course, this year is going to be one of those summers when you're 12 years old and it's all blue sky and sun, and the summer will never end. You won't ever have to go back to school, the real world. Eventually I managed to get in to the screen. You know, I became one of these flat people who just looks at the screen all day and wonders why their back is aching mid-afternoon. And words started to stay on the screen, and they started to be printed out, and I started to get a sense of where I was moving with the work. And once you understand where the work wants to go, you simply go with the tide. It's rather like swimming. You don't swim against the tide, you go with it. But you, of course, correct slightly. You know, you edge towards shore, you edge away from shore deliberately. And you start midway in, maybe June, July, you start doing some serious editing on the first part of your productivity, because a lot of rubbish creeps in there. You know, driftwood is around you, there's kelp all over you, you need to get rid of that stuff. So I've done several culls through the writing, and I've thrown away over half of what I've written in terms of a word count for the year. Why? Well, the Burns gave me both the temptation to make too much work too quickly and the strength to resist that temptation. I have been more concerned to focus my aim to make something genuine than I have to just produce page after page of text. Now, of course, every writer says that they want authenticity. They want sincerity, honesty. They want every sentence to hit the reader. But the sad fact of the matter is, and I'm sure that even our winners here today realise this, is that most of the time you miss. Most of the time you have to go back, line up again, have another go at it. and there have been plenty of walking back, line up, take another run-ups in my year. Fortunately, I've ended the residency with 2 books completed. Both are contracted to publishers, and so disappointment is a snare, if you like, that I've been fortunate to avoid putting my foot in. The projects I outlined a year ago, I don't expect anyone here to remember what I said a year ago, nor should they. But essentially there were 2 main projects and an academic project. Let's talk about the academic one very quickly. A Place to Go On From, the collected poems of Ian Loney. Ian died over 20 years ago. His papers were in disarray. I had been wading through them. I felt very much like I was in an estuary with the tide out and the gumboots weren't quite high enough. I've been wading through them for years before I got the burns. What the burns let me do in the first month was do the apparatus. You know, the tedious notes, the collation, is that a capital, is that lowercase, that kind of checking. It's essential. It let me get the manuscript to the point where I could send it to Otago University Press and where they could take it seriously and ultimately make an offer on it. But it's not the sort of thing I've been able to do at home. Having got that under my belt, I then turned to the Mica Pavilion, which essentially is the text for an opera. It's turned into a 4-act opera with no music, so it's not an opera at all. One of the tasks I have coming into 2014 is to find a composer who's interested and, let's be honest, whose music I can enjoy. And I'll try and work that through in the first half of this year, and hopefully within 2014-15 a composer will come to work. I'll start hearing the words fly through the air, which is the way words are made to go, through the air. Second major project, and it's the one that I'm going to profile most today with a reading at the end, is The Speak House, and The Speak House explores the Samoa of Robert Louis Stevenson. It's not a political tract, but of course it looks at aspects of colonial conception and presumption. It's turned into a dramatic sequence that extends for over 500 lines, and as with the Mica Pavilion, there's intimacy and scale. I've also drafted another 22 poems, several approaching 100 lines, and given that I typically, over 30 years prior to the burns, have managed to do about 4 poems a year, of course I've squeezed them out of the small hours before going into the world where financiers rule, the following equation seems to work. 1 burns year equals 6 normal years. So my eyes are still open. My eyes were certainly opened even wider when I came with Paul to consider the entries for the Burns competition. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the judging process, and it's a very straightforward one. The library sent in 3 files, published, unpublished, young poets, the entries. Paul and I had them separately, and we had no contact for probably 10 days. We did multiple readings, independent of one another. We met in a cafe with our shortlists, with our question marks. We traded impressions, and we started to lobby one another. I can say immediately that we were in agreement in one section, and I'll talk more when these are presented. We were in agreement on one section. That was a relief. You don't have to fight for your favourites. Great, we agree. The other 2 sections, I wanted to up my candidate, Paul wanted to preserve his candidate. All we did was refer to close reading and read them out loud. There is no substitute in poetry for reading out loud. And one of the pleasures you're going to have today as an audience is hearing the poets read their poems. Suffice to say that Paul and I, with a bit of toing and froing, finally agreed on positions, notified the library, and here we are. And so, enough of me. Now we can get to the really happy business of talking about the poems and the winning poets. So I'm going to hand over to my co-judge, Paul Veart, for that.
Hello. Yes, as David was saying, this is my 2nd year of helping to judge the Robert Burns poetry competition. And if anything, it was even harder this year because of the high quality of entries we had across all the categories. I'd like to thank David, as well as Kay, the Burns Club, but especially everyone who submitted a poem, whether you placed or not. It was really inspiring for me. It also made me feel quite jealous, actually, of everyone's really good use of Scots. So I now have a Scots dictionary sitting up on my desk upstairs at work. So, yeah, thank you very much for that. Now, our first category is the Stan Forbes Medal for the winning young poet. Stan Forbes was born in Dundee and came to Dunedin in 1958, where he met his wife Roberta, who came from the west coast of Scotland. And along with others, including Dunedin's James K. Baxter, he learnt Tam O'Shanter as a child. He has been a stalwart and office bearer in the Dunedin Burns Club since that time, being president from 1969 until 1972, and is the current patron of the club. He has worked quietly in the background and has contributed with singing, poetry and drama in the tradition of other workhorses, including Bill Oliver, Charlie Turner, Bill Brown and Margaret Smith. Helping children to become familiar with Burns is dear to him. And so, the runner-up for the Stan Forbes Medal for Young Poets is Rosie Ockenvold for To My Father.
Enormous pleasure to read your poem, and runner-up is a very prestigious place to be, and a slightly irritating one too. Whenever I'm runner-up, it's like, oh! But you feel very proud of your work, and Paul and I had tremendous fun reading. So thank you for the joy you brought us. Book, certificate, book place, please. Right. Thank you.
Just as a bit of background to that poem, To My Father is actually based on the ballad The Soldier's Return, which was written by Burns in 1793. The thing that impressed me a lot about it was how it took a stanza from Burns's poem but changed the perspective, so that instead of hearing the words of the soldier, you actually heard the voice of the soldier's young child and a quite different interpretation that they had of the father's return. I really felt you managed to build up this feeling of the child being separated from the celebrations going on around them, and it really cleverly used line breaks to draw out the tension until the father and child are finally reunited. So yeah, thank you very much. And the winner of the Stan Forbes Medal for Young Poets is Joseph Corbett for Me Mate Rabbie.
Last year, and I have to say that even though, you have to bow forward at this point, even though the judging is necessarily and appropriately blind, midway through reading I was thinking, this has got to be Joe, sure. Because of course we never escape, nor should we try to escape our own voice, and one of the things that we managed to do wonderfully, Paul will talk about this more, is get a voice in Scots, and that's something that I can't do, and I have a Scots mother, so I am immensely impressed. Very much.
As Dave was saying, yeah, definitely the thing that first stands out about this poem is your incredibly confident use of Scots. And actually, there was more than one word there I didn't understand, so thank you very much for including your English translation as well. That didn't make life, I think David was probably fine, but I definitely needed that. But after reading it a few times, the other thing that stood out for me was the fact that the language you used was very personal, and it felt as if it had been written by someone who knew Robbie Burns, and you didn't just see him as a literary hero, but he almost seemed like he was someone you knew his flaws and his troubles and his bad habits, as if you were almost writing like a 21st speech for him, or you're a best man at his wedding or something, and I found that insight was what made it really fun to read multiple times, so yeah, thank you very much. Alright, now we move on to the Stan Kirkpatrick Medal, which is awarded for the winning published poet. The late Stan Kirkpatrick joined the Burns Club for a period after serving with the Merchant Navy, including being on convoys to northern Russia. He later moved in 1952 to Southland and helped start a Burns Club there. He helped popularise haggis ceremonies in Dunedin, including the poem addressed to a haggis. The works of Burns held a place in his heart. And in third place for the Stan Kirkpatrick Medal for Published Poets is Denise Garnett's for She's Tamed the Gold.
Now you recall that Denise was overseas.
That was Charlotte.
Charlotte, okay.
So it's someone
Well,
else.
either way, if Denise is overseas, we'll still manage to get this to her. So thank you for your applause for her. Suffice to say that, again, most of the entries in this section managed to use Scots in some way that was convincing, and I think that Denise managed to hit a tone that was instantly attractive, that was seductive, and the only reason that she came second or third is that essentially there was a slight shift of focus in the poem that melted through to the surface, and it meant that that consistency that you're looking for when you're reading wasn't quite there. And all that means is that there's a great deal of writing, and joyous writing, ahead for him.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely agree. I think one of the main things about the poem was the use of religious imagery, and it did seem there definitely was something quite appealing about this, like setting up Dunedin and the Robert Burns statue as the site of pilgrimage, and it seemed appealing, especially in a year when Dunedin is making a bid to become a UNESCO City of Literature. So that sort of had a good feeling about it as well. But we'll move on from there. In second place for the Stan Kirkpatrick Medal for Published Poets is Lynn Hill for Robert Burns meets Honi Tufari.
Congratulations. Thank you. Once again, we brought great pleasure, Paul and I. The poem, it's a really brave poem. It mixes a lot of registers, as I'm sure Paul's about to demonstrate. And, of course, one of the things when you're a poet is you work out quite quickly what you can do well. And the tendency, and you see this in rock bands too, is you think, I know how to do that 3-minute song, with a guitar break 2/3 of the way through and the chorus at the end. I'll just keep doing that. You actually took on something much tougher. Essentially, you were moving between 3 languages, and that undoubtedly caused Paul and I to look very closely and with admiration.
Yeah, I think similarly I also wondered how hard it must be when you're writing Burns-inspired poetry, and there's, he's so successful and popular, and so many people feel like they have a stake in how he's portrayed, and it seemed like by taking Honi Tufari as well, you're almost doubling the pressure on yourself to sort of, the load and the expectation, but I just felt you did that with ease, moving between the two voices and using English and using Te Reo and Scots, and looking at the wider politics of language. I also enjoyed the fact that you highlight the failure of critics and potentially poetry judges as well in their study of poems. So I won't say too much more, but just that felt like a really excellent examination of language. So yeah, thank you very much. All right, and the winner of the Stan Kirkpatrick Medal for Published Poets is Where Now Are Ye Robbie by Robert Free.
You must be a bard now. Well, I admire confidence. It's hard to hang on to it for me. But confidence is again the thing that marks your poem. And lest anyone be worrying, we will hear the winning poems at the end. I'd like to hand over to Paul because Paul is much better at succinctly putting together why this poem is a cracker.
I think the first thing I really noticed was the fact that it jumped straight off the page. And I remember after reading it first time and then heading off to work, I realised I was actually still chanting it to myself as I sort of headed down Stewart Street. And I really enjoyed the short, punchy lines and your simple rhyme packing and how it's sort of built up until you reach that last stanza. For the rest of you as well, you'll hear it soon, but it uses quite traditional Burns imagery like quills and heath and heather, but you seem to use it to show an absence and a feeling of abandonment, like Burns has sort of left us behind to this world of corruption and industry. And I like that you didn't try to sort of explain this or sort of put me as a reader at ease, and you left me feeling like a little bit nervous at the end. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, that's something that felt quite unique in terms of the poem. So yeah, thank you very much. The Alan Miller Memorial Trophy and Medal is awarded to the winning unpublished poet. The late Alan J. Miller was the president of the Dunedin Burns Club from 1959 until 1961, and together with his wife Flora was a strong supporter of the club. He became the patron of the club, a position he held until his death, and he remembered the club in his bequest. Keeping alive the work of Burns was very important to him. In third place, for the Alan Miller Medal for unpublished poets, is Charlotte Steele for Old Riki. Now, Charlotte is away, but we'll give her a round of applause. A quick comment on that poem. It seemed to match a sort of theme we had running through quite a few this year, which was a bit darker, and it felt like it's been sort of influenced by work such as Tam O'Shanter, and it's full of ghouls and ghosts and witches, which we did see a wee bit of. And it almost had this cinematic effect about it. I almost felt like I was sort of watching the introduction to a Peter Jackson film, flying over the sort of the city of Edinburgh between the cathedrals and the castles, and you could imagine the columns of smoke and the bells. And at the end, Burns arrives, almost like a Scottish superhero sort of thing. So it was an interesting piece to read. So hopefully, at some stage, we'll hear it. Now, the runner-up for the Alan Miller Medal for unpublished poets is Barbara Hawthorne for Where Are Ye, Robbie Burns?
This is a really tough section, and I want you to understand that there was very little between the first three placings in this section. And on a different day, with a different sky, Paul and I might have made different decisions, but what we are clear about is that the finest three poems in the section are the finest three poems. Yours is there.
I really felt with your poem, it really refused to remain on the page, and it felt like it was one of those poems that wanted to be read immediately out loud to an audience. The rest of you, each stanza compared a different type of man to Robbie Burns, which is sort of very hard to match. And you cleverly used repetition just to tie the whole piece together very nicely. And I could imagine if you were reading it out loud in a pub or something, you'd quickly have the audience knowing the lines and sort of reading along with you. So that felt like a very nice thing to do. And I enjoyed your emphasis on the kindness of Burns as well. And maybe that's why he's still sort of so popular today. Last but not least, the winner of the Alan Miller Medal for unpublished poets is Christina Huell for Laddie with a Welcome Smile.
Get this as well, and because we know you've got four hands, you get these, and as with the other two first place getters, you get to read your poem. But I'm suggesting that even though you're standing here now, you might want to actually get rid of those and have time to get your poem. So I'm now going to ask the other two first place winners to come up immediately after Paul has finished talking about the poem. Just giving you a heads up, so I'm going to ask you, Joe, and I'm going to ask Robert to come up immediately after and read, and give Christina time to get herself together.
Just as a little introduction then, I think what caught me about your poem was the idea that it's a love poem, but it's written by a farmer, and it felt like to one of his or her shepherds or farmhands. And of course Burns himself is also a farmer, and so the piece that this poem is based on uses rural imagery. But it seemed like you took that idea and you sort of pushed it a little bit further, because throughout the poem there's this sort of combination of romantic, naturalistic description. There's also an underlying feeling of this hidden or unrequited love, and you only get these little snippets of it throughout it, and the poem seems to sort of draw you in and sort of taunt you about it, and then suddenly you return to more everyday things, and so by the end you're still not quite sure how much has happened, but it just felt like the whole way through it had that sort of running through it, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, it was a very good piece to read. Thank you.
So this is where the proof's in the pudding. This is where we get to hear the three first place getters. And I'm going to ask Joe to come up and read his winning poem. And then Robert, if you could follow, and then Christine.
Me mate Rabbie. I hae good memories of him and me, gone back years 103, so hide all round to hear tale of me mate Rabbie. Since he came forth in Alloway, he was a Gallasway smart bairn. His kinney always ran away from Hull Hazy to Ferm, but nae scotted care and scrap o' that, boldly stout any challenge Ferm, though net afraid the sugly wee brat or ever-present Scottish germ. Quilpen was his friend frae start, for his father swat him fast, and skill of hay spawned from young hat. At 15, he loved the bonny lass. Aye, he couldn't stay frae paper, and we joked about his posing. He was writing all the time, that is, when he went a dozing. Many times I told him to put down that pen and grab a keg. No impartial was Rabbie, it's true, to unbear who lass's leg. It's an understatement, aye. Oh Rob, how many shillers home did you bring? On top of mistress's hair in Scott, what else did you hae in Land of Spring? You're lucky your wife never rummaged you in, and your friends didn't boot up your hind. But I never passed judgment or near your faults, as you never judged any of mine. I got to credit my mate's workings too, frae red rose and a man to a mouse. Aye, his pen could be stuck to his hand with glue, and his influence didn't ken nae bounds. I sat through his talkings of the globe about how borders between classes should crush. I told him he were gallus, little could I know, he'd inspire whole countries, sick as rush. But Rabbie, you peely wally, Uncle Rabbit, that sick he thied. You sugly man, though it's so bonny, dinna help you nae, and at 37, you died. But Rabbie's legacy lives on brave and fair, and his poetries are making a killing. Only thing for which I harbour a care is that the bastard still owes me a shilling.
That was lovely, wasn't it? Put a smile on your face. My poem is considerably shorter, so I've got a few words to preface it that speak to the beauty of rhyming poetry. So I'll just read that and then straight on to the poem. My lords, ladies, gentlemen, honoured special guests, members of the media with name tags on your chests, thank you for attending and lending ears and eyes, for humbled as I am to win this most prestigious prize. It is on such occasions I urge you, take the time to feel the magic woven by a poem dipped in rhyme. I'm not endorsing doggerel, for that is sometimes worse than those who write in lyric prose and deign to call it verse. But lines that have a heartbeat, a rhythm and a form, and words that work in unison to rise above the norm, are poems that have resonance and stand out from the crowd when their musicality is proudly read aloud. So let their lilting laughter ripple for a while, and just indulge as I do in their playful skill and guile. And to my fellow poets, whose works I have enjoyed, how sweet to hear the Scottish brogue so beautifully employed. And thank you to the sponsors and all that they've embraced, and also to the judges for having such good taste. And now to Robbie. Where now are ye, Robbie? Wherefore art thou still? no words of wisdom on thy lips, no quiver in thy quill. Thou hast returned with kudos to soils from whence ye came, whilst all the spoils of conquest have turned this world to shame. And all thy good hath come undone, as dust returns to dust, and all thy works corrupted by those in whom we trust. And day hath turned to night upon the heath where heather grows, and all the would-be poets are writing verse in prose. Oh, where now are ye, Robbie Will? Ye may come back again, and gie us lines we canna read, with words we didna ken. Thank you.
I wanted to explain a little bit about this. It's a song, really, as much as a poem, and it's written kind of as a response from the Lassies to this song that Burns wrote, "Lassie with the Lint White Locks." And it's not one of his more well-known songs, but it's my favorite of his songs, and it's my favorite, I think, because it's beautiful and also because it drives me nuts. Because in the chorus, he calls this lassie artless, simple and without guise. And I don't think any woman in Robbie Burns' life was simple and without guise. Certainly not Jean Armour, his long-suffering wife. So I wanted to rewrite this song, or write it from the perspective of that lassie, and give her some agency, give her a role to play in this interaction. And I wanted to set it here in New Zealand. And in thinking about that, then, Tangata Whenua is the way to do that. The thing that this lassie might use to bind the laddie to her is their shared experience of the land. And so that's really what the song then is about. And I should say, when I hear it in my head, I hear it as a song, but nobody here wants to hear me sing it, so I'm going to read it instead. Laddie with the welcome smile, bonny laddie, wayward laddie, promise me to stay a while, though I know you'll leave me. When spring breaks green, you can't resist the lassie whom you've not yet kissed. But 'fore you go, I do insist, the ewes need help with lambing. Laddie with the welcome smile, bonny laddie, wayward laddie, promise me to stay a while, though I know you'll leave me. When winter's past and spring is new, before the sun drives off the dew, lemonwood binds me to you, its perfume spell enchanting. Laddie with the welcome smile, bonny laddie, wayward laddie, promise me to stay a while, though I know you'll leave me. The corfee tree, the foul rope, don't cast their fate to chance or hope. Now come with me and plough the slope, my barley yet needs planting. Laddie with the welcome smile, bonny laddie, wayward laddie, promise me to stay a while, though I know you'll leave me. The sun climbs high to mine the grain, cicadas roar like winter rain. Now come with me, the leafy lane shall shade late summer's pleasure. Laddie with a welcome smile, bonny laddie, wayward laddie, promise me to stay a while, though I know you'll leave me. And when the bellbird rings its song, the hay is stacked, shadows long. Could winter's promise yet prove wrong? Could harvest time have cured thee? Laddie with the welcome smile, bonny laddie, wayward laddie, promise me to stay a while, though I know you'll leave me.
It's been delightful, and now it falls to Paul, Majella and I to farewell you. And the way we're going to do that is Majella's going to read a poem, then I'm going to follow up with a pale imitation of what she's read, one of my own, and then Paul and I are going to usher you out quickly so that we can go and have a drink. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you and congratulations to all the winners. Please welcome Majella Cullinane, the new Burns poet.
The Orcadian Lament. He would hold the comb carefully, just as he might a small injured bird, his fingers tense for friction, resistance, as he'd unravel the long rope of hair. He loves that sound, when she teases the snarls out. In it he hears the rigging of a boat, waves against the prow, the slow rhythm of oars stroking the sea. Leave the work of dreams to darkness, the gold of the day coming down in shadows is what he attends to. A strange creature, this woman, as much like the riddle of stones they passed today, those stationary warriors to wind, their armour lichen-licked, damp and hailed with snow and sea. The glint in her hair then, as the air turned oyster grey, and trees crushed with ice and snow. From nowhere, a warmth in his veins, on his beard and tongue he tastes ice, swallows the words he cannot bring himself to say, "Woman, hand me that comb."
Thank you, Majella. I'm going to read the closing part of The Speak House, the poem that is set in Samoa in the final years of Robert Louis Stevenson's life. The sun does not bear witness. It is just a passer-by, does not mind corners, let alone blind ones. Most songs about the sun mistake light for inspiration, warmth for concern, but it's not personal. It's not attracted to us. Why do we bother? The fisherman's sail catches fire at dusk. His stomach turns because the net is empty. Go down Mount Baia in silence. Maybe the dust will not stop you. Maybe you will make it through December into the new Tusitala, the new silence. Dripping lianas. It has come true. The promised land is underfoot. Sun stuck on the treetops. Love tangible in the detail of being here, firstborn and fresh as every morning. I expect to see a Christmas tree, handmade stars hanging over bags of sweets from an Edinburgh confectioner. I expect my father will arrive, laughing. When you stop, so does the road. Accept that Vailima is real when you're not there, however little breath comforts your lungs when you hear the last rites. If you hear them, Stevenson, the lighthouse on the sea, beyond the bar, beyond all possibility of an house not made, and in the wave, and then. Thank you very much.